For thousands of years, one single person got the credit for writing some of the most influential books in all of human history. But what if that's not the whole story? Today, we're diving into a genuine mystery, looking for the author of one of humanity's most foundational texts.
Okay, so let's get right into it. The question seems simple enough. Who actually wrote Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy? These books, they're the absolute bedrock of Judaism and Christianity. But the real identity of their author, that's one of the biggest, most hotly debated questions in history.
For most of history, the answer was pretty straightforward. The tradition was clear. Moses, the great prophet, the guy who led Israel out of Egypt, he was the author, writing it all down just as God commanded. It was a core belief, simple as that. But then, some cracks started to appear in that ancient foundation, raising questions that would shake things to their very core.
Now, just so we're all on the same page, the text we're talking about is called the Torah in Judaism, or the Pentateuch if you want to get scholarly. And this isn't just some old history book. No, this is the foundational story of the people of Israel, their origins, their covenant with God, and the laws that literally shape their identity. So this question of who wrote it, it's really a question about the origins of that identity itself.
So let's put on our detective hats for a bit and start with the traditional view. What are the clues, both inside the text and buried in the sands of time, that point to one single brilliant author living way back in the 15th century BC? Okay, so argument number one, and it's a big one, comes directly from the Torah itself. You've got several passages just like this one from Exodus, where it explicitly says God told Moses to write stuff down. Laws, history, even songs. For believers, it's not a huge leap to think that command just extended to, all 5 books. The case for Moses really stands on a few key pillars. First, proponents argue that Moses, having been raised in the Egyptian royal court, would have had the exact kind of education needed for a massive project like this. Then they point to these super specific, almost journalistic geographical details of the Exodus journey, saying it reads like an eyewitness account. Some scholars also see this grand, unified literary structure, arguing it feels like the work of one mind, not a bunch of different writers. And finally, you have this timeline from the Book of 1 Kings, which provides a nice anchor, placing the Exodus right in the 15th century BC, a time frame that fits perfectly with when Moses would have lived.
Now, here's a really interesting little clue, kind of subtle but fascinating. The Torah refers to the king of Egypt simply as Pharaoh. That's it. What's wild is that at the time Moses would have lived, Egyptian scribes often did not name foreign kings in their official records. But fast forward a few centuries to when books like 1 Kings were written, and it was standard practice to name them. This little detail suggests the author was following the writing customs of the 15th century BC, not some later time. Okay, let's jump forward in time, way forward from when this was supposedly written, to a pretty incredible archaeological find. We're talking hundreds of years after Moses, but long before many critics think the Torah was even finished. And it turns out someone in Jerusalem was literally wearing a piece of it as jewelry. And this is where things get really cool, because we have actual physical evidence. These tiny silver scrolls were found in a tomb, and when archaeologists carefully unrolled them, they found an inscription of the priestly blessing from the Book of Numbers. This is huge. It proves that parts of the Torah's text were written down much, much earlier than some skeptical theories claimed. Now, it doesn't prove Moses wrote it, right? But what it does do is push the text's origins deep, deep into Israel's history. Okay, so the case for Moses seems pretty strong, right? But, like any good mystery, there's another side to the story. Over the centuries, a different set of clues started to emerge, textual puzzles that just didn't quite fit, and they started to cast some serious doubt on the traditional story.
And the biggest, most glaring puzzle of all? The ending. The very last chapter of the Torah gives this beautiful, detailed, and poignant account of Moses' death, his burial by God himself, and how the people mourned for him. Which, of course, raises the unavoidable question, how did he write that? Even ancient commentators wrestled with this. The Talmud actually suggests his successor, Joshua, wrote those final verses. Others said Moses wrote it prophetically. But either way, you can see how it opens the door, even just a crack, to the possibility that someone else had a hand in writing the text. And it's not just the very end, either. You start to find these weird little phrases sprinkled all through the text. Take this one from Genesis. It's describing Abraham arriving in Canaan, and the author makes a point of noting that the Canaanites were then in the land. Just think about that phrasing for a second. You only say something was then there if, well, now it's not. It strongly implies the author is writing from a time long after Moses and Joshua, a time when the Israelites had already conquered Canaan and the Canaanites weren't a major presence anymore. It's like saying the payphone was then on the corner. It immediately tells you the person speaking is from a later generation. It's a small detail, but for scholars, it's a huge clue. And then there's the silence from Egypt. For a story this massive, we're talking the enslavement of an entire people and their miraculous escape, archaeologists and historians have found nothing. A deafening silence in the very extensive records of ancient Egypt. No mention of Israelite slaves, no record of the 10 plagues, not a peep about a guy named Moses. Now, some argue the Egyptians just wouldn't record their defeats, but for many scholars, this total lack of corroboration is a pretty big deal. So you have all these pieces, the death of Moses, those odd phrases, the silence from Egypt, and all these inconsistencies led scholars, starting back in the 17th century, to propose a pretty radical new theory. What if the Torah wasn't a single book by a single author at all? What if it was something far more complex? So meet the documentary hypothesis. You might also hear it called the JEPD theory. It's pretty much the dominant theory in modern biblical scholarship. And it suggests the Torah is actually an intricate tapestry, one that's been skillfully woven together from at least 4 distinct literary threads, each with its own style, its own vocabulary, and its own unique perspective on God. Let's break this down real quick. You've got the oldest source, J, named because it uses God's personal name, Yahweh, and it often portrays God in very human-like ways. Then you have E, the Elohist, who prefers the more general term for God, Elohim, and often shows God communicating through dreams. Next is D, the Deuteronomist, which makes up most of the book of Deuteronomy and is all about law and covenant. And finally, you have P, the priestly source, which is really focused on rituals, genealogies, and a very majestic, transcendent view of God. The theory is that over centuries, brilliant editors wove these sources together to create the Torah we have today. What's interesting is this theory also helps make sense of some other things, like the iconic story of Moses' birth. Now look at how similar it is to the much, much older Mesopotamian legend of Sargon the Great. The parallels are uncanny, right? This doesn't mean the story was copied, but it does suggest that its authors were using a common literary formula from the ancient world to show that a hero was destined for greatness, a pattern that feels more consistent with a story crafted over time than a direct historical report. So where does that leave us? We've got 2 very different pictures here. One of a single, divinely inspired author, and another of a community's faith story compiled over generations. And this is so much more than an academic debate. This goes to the very heart of what the Torah is and where its authority comes from. Let's just compare them side by side. In the traditional view, the Torah's authority is absolute because it's seen as coming directly from God through Moses, a perfect, unchanging revelation. But in the scholarly view, the Torah is more like a sacred library. Its authority comes from the fact that it was preserved, cherished, and woven together by generations of faithful people to tell their foundational story. Its power lies in its role as a living testimony of a community. For many believers, the stakes in this debate are incredibly high, and this quote from the Gospel of John really shows you why. For many Christians, Jesus himself seems to endorse that Moses was the author right here. So in this view, to question Moses is to potentially question the authority of Jesus himself, tying the New Testament directly to the traditional authorship of the Old. So in the end, the whole debate really boils down to this. What is this text? Is it a history book dictated from heaven, perfect and complete from the very beginning? Or is it something more dynamic, a sacred record of a people's long, complicated, and evolving journey with their God, containing the voices and the faith of many generations? And that leaves us, and you, with one final question to think about. Whether the Torah came from one hand or from many, from a single moment in time or across 1,000 years, where does its ultimate value lie? Is it in how it was written? Or is it in the enduring message that has shaped civilizations and inspired billions for millennia?